The area of the world's oceans is much larger than the area of the entire Earth's land. It is more than 350 million square kilometers, which is approximately 3 times the area of all continents combined. It is not surprising that you can easily get lost in the vastness of the ocean, finding yourself on a small raft or boat for many months, but it would seem how possible this is because in the modern world, in the age of huge production and trade, 70% of cargo is delivered by water. Huge ships, tankers, bulk carriers, cruise liners and fishing ships sail by one after another, and it's difficult to get lost on any vessel without being noticed. But it turns out that all these ships sail along relatively narrow sea corridors, along the shortest route between ports, and once outside these sea routes, in the open ocean, you can hang out indefinitely in the vast expanses of the ocean, hoping for a miracle, or sea currents that will carry you to land or shipping routes. In this video we will look at such amazing stories of survival spent in the open ocean without food or water supplies. It would seem that a person can survive in the ocean for another week or at most a month. You will be surprised, but the record is more than 14 months. This incredible story happened to Jose Salvador Alvarenga, who, going on a 2-day fishing trip with his partner, found himself in the open ocean and survived there for more than 14 months, namely 438 days. This story begins in 2012. 2 fishermen set out to sea from a port on the west coast of Mexico on a small 7-meter fishing boat. They had barely moved a few kilometers from the shore when the ship's engine failed, and the current began to carry it further and further from the Mexican coast. There was no modern electronic equipment on board, and the only radio was broken due to seawater entering it. Provisions included several sandwiches and a 1.5-liter bottle of water. To avoid starvation, men caught fish and seabirds, eating them raw, and their thirst was quenched with drops of dew and rainwater. Jose's partner did not like this diet. He felt sick after every meal and spent more and more time sleeping. His body endured 4 months of torment and gave up. According to Jose, one day Cordoba simply did not wake up from exhaustion. He watched him for several days, and then threw him overboard into the sea. Left alone, Jose lost track of time. Day gave way to night, and it seemed like this ad infinitum. But one fine morning, having gathered his last strength to get up, land appeared on the horizon. It turned out that he had sailed to the Marshall Islands, the existence of which was not even known suspected and which are located about 10,000 kilometers from Mexico. Having got out onto land, Jose wandered along the shore and saw people in the distance. He rushed towards them screaming, which pretty much frightened the married couple Amy and Russell. Overgrown and burnt, he tried to explain something to them in an unfamiliar language, pointing to the ocean. The only thing people understood was that he was hungry and exhausted. Amy and Russell fed the man, watching in amazement as he gobbled up the food. They had never seen a man with such an appetite, who, like a forest fire, destroyed all the supplies in the refrigerator. However, they could not understand the reasons for such a strange appearance and hunger, because the mysterious stranger spoke Spanish and all the local residents communicated with each other in English. Luckily, in a neighboring village there lived a student from Norway who spoke the Castilian dialect at a basic level. Jose spoke only Spanish and at first claimed to be Mexican. It later turned out that he was a native of El Salvador who moved to Mexico. With the help of a small set of words and gestures, we managed to learn the amazing story of Jose Alvarenga, which shocked not only the residents of the Marshall Islands, but the whole world. After the rescue, Jose Alvarenga returned to El Salvador, the city where he was born, and took a solemn oath that he would never go to the open sea again. He said that he had swum for the rest of his life. This amazing survival story happened to a Chinese sailor named Poon Lim, who in 1942 joined the British merchant ship Ben Lomond, on which he served as second steward. During the war, shipping lines were unsafe, but such work was well paid. In November 1942, the ship, converted into a military transport, was on a voyage from Cape Town to South America. On the 3rd day of the voyage, the Ben Lomond was attacked by the German submarine U-172. The ship hit by the torpedo began to quickly sink to the bottom. Poon Lim was among the few who managed to put on a life jacket and leave the sinking ship. Having sailed some distance from the sinking ship, the Pun saw members of his crew who were on a life raft. He began to desperately call for help, but they did not hear him. The raft was quickly carried away by the wind. Luckily for him, among the various rubbish left over from the sinking ship, he noticed another life raft. He managed to swim to it, but none of the crew members were on board. The wooden life raft, with an area of 2.5 square meters, was equipped with an awning designed to save sailors from the scorching sun. On board there was an emergency 2-day supply of fresh water and food, designed for 25 people. This reserve should have been enough to wait for help. After all, the ship sank in an area of active shipping, and the sailor believed that it would be quickly discovered. However, the raft was rapidly drifting away from the shipping route. He soon realized that if he didn't figure out a way to get food and water, he wouldn't be able to survive. Poon Lim began collecting rainwater from the awning. Having disassembled a flashlight found on the raft, he pulled out a spring from it, making fish hooks out of it. The sailor dried the caught fish in the sun, ate some of it, and used some as bait for new prey. The longer the voyage lasted, the more cunning and resourceful he became. From a large nail pulled out of the raft, he made a large hook, and the remains of a caught seagull served as bait for a large fish. Using such a simple tackle, we managed to catch a large shark, which jumped onto the raft. In a fight with a fisherman, I had to tinker with it so as not to become its victim myself. He used the shark's blood for drinking, and dried the fins in the sun. In China, in its native Hainan, shark fins were considered a delicacy. At first, Poon Lim tried to count days, then weeks, and eventually began to count only months, focusing on full moons. Neither the storm, nor the sweltering heat, nor the endless loneliness drove him crazy. A few days before meeting the fisherman who saved him, he realized that he was approaching land. The color of the water had changed, and the seagulls were now circling around his raft without ceasing. He went ashore without outside help. He was taken to the hospital, where doctors determined that there was no threat to life. The skin was weathered and roughened, there were sunburns on it, but these were mere trifles. When the identity of the sailor was checked through the British consul in Brazil, establishing all the circumstances of his story, it turned out that his wanderings on the ocean lasted 133 days. Surprisingly, during this time he lost only 9 kilograms. When told that no one had ever survived so many days on a raft at sea, Poon Lim replied, "I hope no one ever has to break that record." Maurice and Marilyn Bailey, a British couple, were adrift on a raft for 117 days in the Pacific Ocean in 1973 before being rescued. This story begins on March 4, 1973. Marilyn and Maurice woke up before dawn. Their yacht passed by a ship that illuminated the sea with a powerful spotlight. The sailors crowded on the deck and watched the beam scouring the waves. "What do they need?" Marilyn asked. "Fishermen, probably," Maurice suggested. "It's not that far to land." When the ship was left behind, the yacht shook from a powerful blow. Marilyn ran out onto the deck and saw a huge sperm whale coming from the stern. Near him, the dark blue sea turned red. There was a huge wound on the animal's body, from which blood was gushing. The whale was dying and soon went underwater. They did not immediately notice the half-meter hole that appeared under the waterline after the collision with the whale. Through it, water slowly but surely flowed into the hold. Marilyn rushed to the pump, and Maurice tried to plug the hole with a spare sail, pillows and other things. Everything was in vain. The water continued to rise. 50 minutes after the collision with the sperm whale, the couple moved onto a life raft. The yacht, with which so many plans and hopes were connected, was dying before their eyes. "Those fishermen were whalers this morning," Maurice said grimly as the tip of the mast disappeared under the water. "Our yacht wouldn't hurt a sperm whale. He was already wounded. And he attacked because he mistook us for them." Marilyn saved from the sinking yacht a small tile, a box of matches, a map, a sextant, a compass, rubber and glue, several knives, plastic mugs, a couple of buckets, a flashlight, scissors, binoculars, and 6 flares. In addition, almost 40 liters of fresh water and a supply of canned food were transferred to the raft, which could last for several weeks. The raft was covered with an awning. Only one person could lie under it. There was simply not enough space for the other. Fortunately, Maurice managed to pump up the inflatable boat, which was taken along for the voyage just in case. She was tied to the raft with a rope. The shipwreck occurred in an area of active shipping, so Maurice and Marilyn had no doubt that they would be quickly rescued. They whiled away the time playing homemade cards and dominoes. 8 days later, Marilyn and Maurice saw the first ship. They shouted, waved their arms and spent all their signal bombs, but he did not stop. A few days later another ship appeared on the horizon. To attract the attention of his team, they had to set fire to excess clothes, but they were not noticed this time either. A month later, Maurice began to lose hope of salvation. It seemed to him that now they would sail forever and would never see anything but the waves and the sky. Marilyn believed in fate and convinced him that they were not destined to die at sea if they had lasted so long. Maurice did not believe in anything and held on only thanks to his wife. When food supplies began to run low, they began to fish for turtles and birds that landed on their raft. On June 30th, Marilyn woke up Maurice and said that she heard the noise of a motor. He reluctantly looked outside and saw a fishing boat nearby. Marilyn climbed onto the boat and began frantically waving her arms. The ship was no more than 800 meters away, but, like everyone else, it passed by. Marilyn looked at the departing fishermen and whispered, "Please don't swim away." Fortunately, they were still noticed from the ship. It was the Korean ship Woolme 306, which was returning to Busan after 2 years in the Atlantic. The exhausted sailors were brought on board. They didn't say anything, they just slid onto the deck and sobbed with happiness, recalled the captain of the ship. Korean fishermen took them out and landed them in Hawaii a few weeks later. After their return, Maurice and Marilyn wrote a book about the 117 days they spent on the raft. The fee was enough for a new yacht, and after a couple of years, in 1975, the couple set off on a new voyage, which went as planned without incident. 5 years later, Maurice and Marilyn returned to England and settled in the town of Lymington on the English Channel. They continued to traveled all over Europe and became interested in mountaineering. In 2002, Marilyn died of cancer. After she died, Maurice often remembered those days on the open ocean. Fears are a thing of the past, and all that remains is the fantastic adventure that he experienced with his beloved. Shortly before his death, he gave an interview in which he admitted that he would like to be on that raft again. Well, that's all for today. Thank you all for watching. If it was interesting, support the video with likes, thank you for subscribing, and take a look at what else we have prepared for you.